Good evening, everyone. In the previous session of Management of Financial Services, I was explaining about hire purchase. So, in my last session, I explained what is hire purchase, what are the features of hire purchase, the legal aspect of hire purchase, and then I explained the hire purchase agreement, means what are the terms and conditions under a hire purchase agreement. Okay. In today's session, I am going to explain the merits and demerits of hire purchase system, and then I am going to explain the rights of hire. Okay, so let's begin the session. So hire purchase system can be considered to be very beneficial from the seller's point of view as well as from the buyer's point of view, because the buyer do not have to pay a large amount of money at once. The payment can be done on an installment basis. So that can be considered to be very beneficial for a buyer. From the seller's point of view, they get certain amount of money in a for a particular time period, and when there is a case of default, they can again repossess the goods. So hire purchase has provided a proper system for those who cannot afford to have a big machinery, expensive machinery at once, but they can hire the machinery, they can pay the installment. So many organizations, many small and big organizations take the benefit of hire purchase system. And it is also good for growth and expansion of every organization, whether it is small or whether it is large. Okay. So the first advantage of hire purchase system is convenience to payment. So like I said, the buyer do not have to pay a large amount of money at once. The payment is made on the basis of installment. So a certain amount of installment will be fixed when the purchaser, where the buyer and seller enter into an agreement of hire purchase. They decide a certain amount of money as installment. They also decide the time interval of payment of installment and the total period within which all the installments are needed to be paid by the buyer. So this system is very convenient from a buyer's point of view, because as a buyer they can spend a small amount of money every month for a particular product or or some kind of goods or machinery. So if we consider the payment method, it is very convenient, it is very easy for the buyer. They have to pay a small amount of money which is already determined while entering into the agreement. So it does not create a huge burden on the buyer. Okay. So the first advantage of hire purchase system, that is convenience in the payment method. Okay. The second one is increased volume of sales. Now, there are many people, even businessmen, who cannot afford to buy or cannot afford an expensive machinery or a large amount of goods at once, because they have to pay a very large amount of money, which may not be possible for many people, whether whether those are businessmen or they want to purchase for personal use. So hire purchase system actually helps the seller to increase the volume of sales, because a certain small amount of money is fixed for every month, and that is very convenient for the buyer. So when hire purchase system of selling takes place, many purchases gets interested in purchasing different types of machinery, different types of goods by paying installment. So that leads to increase in the volume of sales. When these kind of offers are provided by the sellers, it definitely increases the volume of sales, because more and more number of buyers are interested in purchasing goods or any kind of machinery in hire purchase system. So that leads to increase in sales, and that benefits the seller to a large extent. Okay. The next point is increased profit. So when sales are increased, so definitely the profits will also be increased. because here the buyer not only pays the entire amount of the goods or machinery, but the buyer also pays a certain amount of interest, which is fixed while entering into the agreement. So when the sales increases, definitely the profits will also increase, because more and more number of people will be attracted to this hire purchase system. Clear? The next point is it encourages savings. Now, as a consumer, as a person, we let us consider a normal person, not a businessman or a person who does not do any kind of business. A person who is having a particular or who is doing a particular job has limited salary or limited amount of money with with himself or herself. Now, these people cannot afford to purchase certain machinery or certain items for home because they may be very expensive. They may not fit into the budget of the family. So, this hire purchase system actually encourages many people to save a small amount of money for the payment of installment, which is very easy for them also. Like I said, when you want to purchase by paying the entire amount, it creates a burden on the person who gives a large amount of money for a particular product. But when the payment is made on an installment basis, that reduces the burden. Even if little bit of interest is paid, but still it reduces the burden because at once a large amount of money is not being paid. So if many sellers introduce the hire purchase system, it will encourage more and more customers to save a certain amount of money for the payment of installment, and that will also encourage the consumers, or it will help the consumers to create a habit of saving a certain amount of money even if they do not pay any installment. So installment payment actually encourages people to save a certain amount of money which is to be paid for the installment purpose. So this also creates a good habit in the consumers, in the customers, to save a certain amount of money. Okay, the next one is helpful for small traders. Small traders do not have a large amount of money, so they cannot purchase whether it is raw material or any kind of product in large numbers. So when hire purchase system is introduced, these small traders can purchase goods or machineries on hire purchase system, and they can sell those machineries to at a higher rate to their consumers. So to small traders, this system proves to be very beneficial. They do not have to pay a large amount of money at once. They will pay a very small amount of money in every month. So that this reduces the burden on the traders, and this also increases their business. Okay, so they can purchase goods on hire purchase basis, and they can sell these goods after making full payment at a higher rate to their consumers. Okay, so this is not only helpful for personal reasons, but also it is helpful for small traders. The next one is earning of interest. Like I said, whenever the buyer and the seller enter into a hire purchase agreement, they also decide the interest rate, at what amount of interest will be paid by the buyer to the seller. So usually many sellers fix a higher interest rate, or they see the trend what kind of interest is being charged by other sellers. So they can give also little bit of, or they can charge a lower rate of interest in order to increase their sales. So here the seller not only gets the total amount of a particular machine or goods, but the earning is more than the price of the goods, because they are getting the interest. With each installment, a certain amount of interest is also being paid by the paid by the buyer. So here the seller earns more than the usual selling and purchasing. Clear? So earning of interest is a concept which is present in hire purchase. Interest is being charged, which increases the earnings of the seller. Okay, and the last one is lesser risk. So this advantage is from the point of view of the seller. So how risk is reduced? First of all, during a particular time interval, within a particular time interval, the buyer will be making payments of the installment. But if the buyer is unable to pay any installment or is unable to pay the rest of the installments, the seller has the right to repossess the machinery or the goods, whatever is sold in the under the hire purchase agreement. So here the risk for a seller is very less, because when the buyer is unable to pay the installment, the seller can reclaim the goods, or they can get the goods back with themselves. So that reduces the degree of risk in hire purchase agreement from a seller's point of view. Okay. So these are the advantages of hire purchase system. Now, since a hire purchase has so many advantages, it does not mean that it don't have any kind of disadvantage. Even if hire purchase has so many advantages, it still suffers from some limitations or disadvantages. The first one is higher price. Now here this is a disadvantage from a buyer's point of view. Now, as a buyer, you are paying more than the actual price of the machinery or actual price of the equipment or goods. So this definitely is a disadvantage or demerit for a buyer, because for example, the price of a machinery is around 40,000, but you are paying around 45,000 or 50,000, because you have to pay the interest amount also. So from a buyer's point of view, definitely the price is very high because of the interest. Now, usually sellers charge a very high rate of interest because they are providing higher purchase facility. So that creates an extra burden on the buyer, because they don't have to pay only the amount of the price, or sorry, don't have to pay just the price of the goods, but at the same time they have to pay extra interest. So that, like I said, increases the burden of the buyer. Okay. The next one is artificial demand. Now, when all the sellers give this facility, like give this hire purchase facility to the consumers, so this also leads to creation of artificial demand. Usually what happens, many people think that this product we can purchase at on an installment basis, so let us purchase the product. But in most of the situation, the consumer may not even require the product. So that leads to artificial demand. Because it is available on an installment basis, many consumers are attracted towards the product and they purchase the product. But this kind of purchasing can also increase the number of defaulters, because once people assume that this product is not necessary, then they may not pay the rest of the installment. So which definitely is going to we can say hamper the business of the seller. So because of hire purchase system, it creates an artificial demand of the product. So many consumers purchase products even if they do not require. And after using the product for a certain time period, they may also not pay the rest of the installment payments. Okay. The next one is heavy risk. Now, the risk can be considered from the both of the point of view of the seller as well as point of view of the buyer. So first of all, when as a buyer you fail to pay the rest of the installment because of some problems, then the product will be gone, the product will be taken back by the seller. At the same time, you have already paid a large amount of money for the product, which is considered as higher charge. So here we can say that you have used the product for a certain time period, but you still do not become the owner of the product, and you have to give back the product to the seller because of non-payment of installment. So that also includes, or that this is a very high risk for a buyer. And from seller's point of view also, there is a high degree of risk, because when consumers become defaulter, they are not able to pay the rest of the installments, then the seller will definitely repossess the goods. But second hand goods which are already being used for certain time period by some people may not fetch good amount of from the product, because definitely when a particular product is being was possessed by a particular consumer for certain time period, it becomes a second hand good or product. So second hand goods and products cannot be sold at the same price. So definitely it is also risky from a seller's point of view. So non payment of installment is not only risky for the buyer, but at the same time it is also very risky for the seller, because the goods become second hand and it is very difficult to get a good amount of money by selling the second hand products. Okay, the next one is difficulty in recovering installments. So like I said, when many sellers give the benefit or give the offer of hire purchase, they include the system of hire purchase, it increases the demand of the product. Now uh, this leads to a completely different situation, where consumers, they enter into a hire purchase agreement with wrong consumers who do not even have the intentions of paying the entire amount of installment. So there are chances that the sellers will enter into an agreement, hire purchase agreement with the wrong customer, from whom getting the installments will be very difficult. So when the consumers, when the buyers do not pay the installment properly, and the seller faces many difficulty in recovering the installment amount, this leads to many problems. The seller has to uh, regularly remind the consumer for the payment of installment. The person may take also different types of actions in order to recover the installment. At the same time, the consumer can also become defaulter, the person is not willing to pay the rest of the amount. So this leads to a lot of difficulty in getting back the money, and if the money cannot be recovered, then they will repossess the machinery or the equipment. And like I said, second hand machinery and equipment do not fetch the right price, it will definitely be sold at a very lower price. So these are the different difficulties which are faced by the seller if they enter into a hire purchase agreement with the wrong consumer or a wrong buyer. Okay, and the last point is asset depreciation. As we already know that each and every asset with the passage of time depreciates. The value of the asset decreases with the passage of time. But what if you have entered into a hire purchase agreement, you have purchased a particular product on an installment basis, and even before payment of all the installments, the asset has been depreciated. So that leads to a huge loss for the buyer. You purchased a product worth rupees 40,000, with interest it is around 45,000, but before even payment of the last installment, the asset has been depreciated. Now the actual value of the asset is around 20,000. So what does it mean? You have paid extra 25,000 for a particular product which is now around 20,000. The product has been depreciated. So this leads to huge loss for the seller. Even if the consumer or the buyer wants to resell the product, the person will not get the right amount because of the depreciation aspect. Okay, so these are the disadvantages from the seller's point of view as well as from the buyer's point of view. Okay, now I am going to explain the rights of the hirer. See, every hirer is the person, we can say, the buyer, the person who pays the installment, the person who enters into agreement with the hiree. Hiree can be considered as the vendor or the seller of the goods or products. So here hirer, like I said, the buyer or the person who pays the installment and gets the equipment or the product. So here it says that the hirer has the usual right of termination, right to terminate the contract before the a transfer of ownership before the payment of final installment, and after that, after the payment of final installment, the ownership of the product or the equipment will be transferred to the hirer. So before that, before the transfer of ownership from the hiree to the hirer has the right to terminate the agreement or terminate the contract at any point of time. But in the Hire Purchase Act of 1972, there are other rights of the hirer which will protect the interest of the hirer, which will provide some kind of benefit to the hirer. Okay. So the first right here says that the hiree cannot terminate the hire purchase agreement for default of payment. So hiree is the vendor, or we can call him seller. Okay, fine. So hiree is a seller. Now seller does not have the right to terminate the hire purchase contract when there is some kind of default in the payment, or some act of the hiree which is not appropriate, or a breach of contract. So whatever may be the reason, whether it is breach of contract, or default of payment, or any kind of activity which is not mentioned, or not entered into the contract. So if the hiree does any such kind of activity, still the hiree cannot terminate the contract. The hiree can only terminate the contract if the hiree has sent a written, or we can say a written document regarding this element to the hirer. Okay, so in the written document it has to be mentioned why the contract is being terminated. So the hirer must be informed in advance when the hiree wants to terminate the agreement. Now when the installment is paid on a weekly basis or less than that time, then the written agreement must be sent in 1 week advance, or before 1 week of termination of contract. So the period of notice, which is written notice, which is given by the hirer, must be 1 week when the installment is paid within a less than 1 week time interval. And in other cases, the notice can be given for 2 weeks, or 1 week, or 2 weeks. So when the installment is being paid within less than 1 week, the notice of the termination can be given before 1 week, and in other cases the notice in written for termination can be given before 2 weeks. Okay, so this actually preserves the right of the hirer, because even if hirer makes some kind of mistakes, the hiree cannot terminate without giving proper notice in return to the hirer. Okay, the next right here says that the right to repossess the goods will not exist unless sanctioned by the court. So if there is any case of default in payment, or any other situation, or any breach of contract or anything, if such things happen, still in those situations, the hiree cannot repossess the goods until and unless it is being sanctioned by court. Okay. So until and unless the court sanctions the repossession of goods, in certain cases, the hiree cannot repossess the goods. For example, if the price of the equipment or something is around 15,000, and half of 15,000 is already paid by the hiree, hirer. The hirer has already paid the half of 15,000. So in this situation, when the hiree wants to take the possession of the goods, the court has to sanction this. The court has to give permission in this situation to the hiree to take back the goods. The first situation is when the price of the equipment is around 15,000, and half of the amount is being already paid by the hirer. So in that situation, proper permission of the court is necessary in order to repossess the goods. So in case where the price of the goods is more than 15,000, and the hirer has already paid 3/4 amount of 15,000, in that situation also the court has to sanction the repossession of the equipment, then only the hiree can repossess the goods. So in these two situations, special permission from the court is necessary so that the hiree can repossess the goods. But in case of motor vehicle, the conditions are little bit different. So in case of motor vehicle, if the price of the vehicle is 5,000 or less than 5,000 and half of it is already being paid by the hirer, in that situation also sanction by court is necessary for repossession of goods. Now if the product, if the vehicle is more than 5,000 and less than 15,000 and three-fourths of the payment is already made by the hirer, in that situation also court need to give permission to the hiree in order to repossess the goods. And if the price of the vehicle is more than 15,000 and installment, three-fourths of the installment is already paid, but less than 9/10 of the installment. So the installment must be more than three-fourths and less than 9/10. If that amount is already paid by the hirer, in this situation also a court needs to give permission for the repossession of the goods. So these conditions are put in order to protect the rights of the hirer. Okay. The next point here says that the hirer has the right of receiving statement from the owner against the payment. So whenever the hirer makes any payment, any amount of installment, interest, the hirer must get some statement from the hiree in written, so that there is a confirmation that the hirer has already paid this much amount of installment for the particular equipment or the particular vehicle. So here not only after making payment the hirer will get some statement, but the hirer will get receive statement whenever the hirer makes any payment of installment. In future also how many number of installments are left to be paid, that statement also is needed to be provided by the hiree. How many installment has been already paid, what is the amount of each and every installment, how many future installments are left, as well as the due date of each and every installment. All the statements related to these elements must be given by the hiree to the hirer, so that there will be a confirmation that the hirer is paying installments on these dates, on due dates, how many installments are left and how many installments has been paid. So a written statement must be provided by the hiree to the hirer. Okay. And the last point here says that if the amount paid by the hirer till the date of repossession of the goods exceeds the total hire purchase price, then the excess amount must be repaid by the hiree. Okay. So if a hirer has already paid more than the amount of the total hire purchase price before the repossession, repossession only takes place when the hirer is not able to pay the remaining installments, or the hirer wants to terminate the contract before the uh, transfer of ownership. So if the hirer has already paid more than the total hire purchase price, then the excess amount must be repaid by the hirer to the, so by the hiree to the hirer. Means the seller must pay the excess amount to the buyer. But at the same time, he can also deduct some of the expenses which has occurred during the repossession of goods or because of some formalities of repossession. So the seller has the right to deduct all those charges and then pay the amount which is paid extra by the hirer. Okay. So here this point simply means that before the repossession of the goods, if the hirer, that is the buyer, has already paid more than the total hire purchase price, then the seller will then the seller will repay the excess amount to the buyer. okay, by deducting some of the necessary charges, and the seller must mention how many what amount of money is being deducted and what are the reasons behind those deduction. So the seller must explain that these are the charges, these are the amount, and this is deducted from the excess amount, and then the excess amount is paid by the paid by the hiree to the hirer. Okay, so the seller pays the excess amount to the buyer after making certain deductions in case of any charges regarding repossession of goods. Okay, so these are the rights of hirer, which actually helps the hirer to protect their rights, and it also helps them uh, by it also helps the hirer because they can be exploited by the hiree. So it reduces the level of exploitation by the hiree. The hiree cannot make or take extra amount of money from the hirer and other things. So these rights actually encourage the consumers to go through the hire purchase agreement so that they can uh, benefit from the hire purchase system. Okay, so these are the rights of the hirer. In the next session, I am going to explain the method of calculating the installment in hire purchase agreement. And then I am going to start another topic which is called lease agreement or lease. Okay, so that's it for today. We will meet in the next session. Thank you.